Leavenworth's rotten kitchen, how inmates were poisoned for profit. The stench that wouldn't leave. If you think the worst thing about prison is losing your freedom, wait until you see what's been cooking behind Leavenworth's kitchen doors. Subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant to reach the outside world. It began with a smell. Not the kind of smell you can escape, one that seeps into your skin, into your clothes, into your sleep. Inmates at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, Kansas's most infamous fortress, said you could smell it from the lower yard all the way to the chapel. A stench like spoiled meat and burnt grease, thick and sour. For years, prisoners had joked about mystery stew and rat soup, but by May of 2018, no one was laughing anymore. That spring, the kitchen started serving something new: meat that glistened gray, bread that crumbled to dust, and gravy that looked like oil slick. On May 14th, 3 inmates collapsed within an hour of lunch. By nightfall, 7 more were vomiting blood. The prison doctor, overwhelmed and terrified, called it a severe bacterial outbreak. But inside Leavenworth, everyone knew better. The food had been killing them slowly for years. The victim who spoke too loud. One of the sickest was Ronald R. J. Miller, a 36-year-old inmate serving time for a string of burglaries in St. Louis. R. J. had been working in Leavenworth's kitchen for 2 years. He wasn't a troublemaker, quiet, careful, the kind of man who learned to keep his head down. But after that outbreak, something changed. He started writing letters to his sister, to journalists, even to the Department of Justice. "They're feeding us trash," he wrote. "Meat that smells like bleach, bread with mold growing under the crust. The guards won't touch it. The kitchen chief says to mix spoiled food with spices to hide the smell. If I die in here, tell them it wasn't natural." His sister never got those letters. A month later, R. J. was found dead in his cell. The official report said suicide by hanging. Other inmates swore he'd been fine the night before, laughing, playing cards. And just like that, the only man willing to talk about the kitchen was gone. The journalist. 2 states away, investigative reporter Evelyn Shaw sat in her Kansas City apartment, staring at a manila envelope that had arrived without a return address. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten note, "He died for telling the truth," a photo of a Leavenworth meal tray, gray meat, congealed gravy, a slice of bread crawling with mold. A flash drive labeled Kitchen Records 2018. When Evelyn opened the files, her screen filled with spreadsheets, inventory lists, shipment receipts, and inspection forms stamped with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But something didn't add up. Every shipment listed the same supplier: Heartland Correctional Foods, a private distributor based in Topeka. Yet, according to state records, the company hadn't existed for 5 years. She called the number on one of the invoices. A woman answered, voice shaky, and hung up as soon as Evelyn said Leavenworth. That was the moment Evelyn realized she wasn't chasing a food scandal. She was chasing a cover-up. The inside man. To get inside, she needed someone who'd been there, and one name came up again and again in old court filings: Marcus Tone Daniels, a former inmate who'd worked in the kitchen before his release in 2016. When she found him, he was living in a rundown motel off the interstate, working nights at a truck stop. His eyes darted to the windows when she said she was a journalist. "You don't know what you're asking about," he said. "Leavenworth's kitchen ain't a kitchen, it's a dump site." He lit a cigarette, shaking slightly. "They used to get meat from this company, Heartland, yeah. They'd roll in boxes with rejected stock stamped on the sides. Stuff that was supposed to go to landfills. The kitchen boss told us to grind it up, mix it with rice, and serve it. Said no one would know." Evelyn leaned forward. "Who was the boss?" He hesitated. "Guy named Darrell Clements. Civilian contractor. Said he was just following orders from the top." She asked if he'd go on record. He laughed bitterly. Lady, they already buried R.J. for talking. You think I wanna end up next to him? But before she left, he handed her something, an ID badge, scorched at the edges. The name tag read, Clements D. Found it in a dumpster outside the kitchen after the fire, Marcus said. Figured it might matter someday. The fire. The fire, he mentioned, had been a small headline at the time. Minor blaze in Leavenworth kitchen, no injuries. But according to maintenance reports Evelyn uncovered later, the fire started the same week R.J. Miller died. The cause? Electrical malfunction near freezer unit. But one of the documents on the flash drive told a different story. An internal email from Darrell Clements to the warden's office read, Freezer inspection complete. Removed expired inventory. Requesting disposal authorization. The date on the email was the day before the fire. And at the bottom, a handwritten note from the warden, denied. Too costly. Find alternate solution. The alternate solution, Evelyn realized, might have been fire. The cover-up deepens. Evelyn's next step was to confront someone in authority. She reached out to Warden Samuel Blanchard, who had since retired to a quiet life in rural Missouri. At first, he refused to talk. But when she showed him the inventory lists, his expression darkened. I didn't approve those shipments, he said quietly. Someone forged my signature. Who? She asked. He hesitated. Clements. But he wasn't working alone. There were people above him, procurement officers in D.C., private contractors, maybe even someone in the bureau. They told us to keep the food budget low no matter what. The less we spent, the bigger the bonuses. Evelyn asked the obvious question. So you let them feed inmates expired food? He looked away. You don't say no to people like that. Not if you want to keep your pension. He took a deep breath and said one last thing before asking her to leave. Check who owned Heartland Correctional Foods before it shut down. The name you'll find, it ain't one you'll forget. The discovery. The next night, Evelyn drove to Topeka and searched through public business record. Heartland's corporate filings had been scrubbed, but an archived record from 2013 revealed the original incorporator, Midwest Correctional Supply Company, the same company connected to the San Quentin scandal 5 years earlier. And the name listed as managing director? Michael Vaughn. Her pulse quickened. Vaughn, the same figure tied to nationwide prison food fraud. But what was he doing funneling food through a ghost company in Kansas? She dug deeper, cross-referencing payments between Leavenworth's procurement office and Heartland's shell accounts. One pattern emerged. A $20,000 maintenance bonus paid every quarter to a man named Darrell Clements, the kitchen supervisor who'd vanished after the fire. Clements wasn't dead, though. His name had resurfaced in another contract 6 months later, working for Baco Logistics, another Vaughn front company. The fire hadn't been a cover-up of his death. It was a reset. Clements had burned the kitchen to destroy evidence, and walked away richer. The missing freezer. The last clue came from a maintenance worker Evelyn tracked down, Jose Ramirez, who had been transferred after the incident. When she met him at a diner near Fort Leavenworth, he told her something that made her stomach twist. After the fire, they told us to remove one of the freezers. Said it was contaminated. But when we opened it, it wasn't food inside. He hesitated. It was paperwork. Boxes of receipts, invoices, even pay stubs. They were freezing the records. Evelyn frowned. Why freeze them? Because paper burns fast. Ice doesn't. He said the warden ordered the entire unit loaded onto a truck for disposal. He watched as guards sealed it and drove it out of the facility. The truck never came back. The meeting. Evelyn finally arranged to meet a Bureau of Prisons contact, an auditor named Lisa Crawford who'd secretly helped her verify documents. They met in the parking lot of a closed strip mall late at night. Lisa handed her a small stack of papers, trembling. "These are from the 2018 audits," she whispered. "They falsified everything. The food budgets, the inspection grades, even the temperature logs." Evelyn flipped through the pages and stopped. There it was. A single payment authorization form signed by M. Vaughn, transferring $3.2 million from operational reserves to Heartland Correctional Foods. Underneath, handwritten initials, S.B. Warden Samuel Blanchard. The same man who'd claimed he was framed. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She looked up at Lisa. Did he know? Lisa nodded grimly. He didn't just know. He was the one who approved the deal. The next morning, Evelyn returned to Blanchard's Missouri farmhouse. His front door was open. Coffee still steaming on the kitchen table. And on the counter, a printed copy of one of her emails. The last line she'd written to him read, "You lied about the contracts, Sam. We need to talk." On top of the paper sat a flash drive labeled, "For Evelyn." When she plugged it into her laptop, the screen filled with video files, security footage from inside Leavenworth's kitchen. In the last clip, time-stamped 2 days before R.J. Miller's death, Darrell Clements walked into the frame, shaking hands with a man in a gray suit. Evelyn froze the image and zoomed in. The man wasn't Vaughn. It was Warden Blanchard himself. Smiling. Handing over a sealed envelope marked "Contract Renewal." And in that moment, Evelyn realized the truth. Leavenworth's rotten kitchen wasn't a failure of oversight. It was a business built on suffering, sealed with signatures, and protected by fire. The taste of blood money. The flash drive sat on Evelyn's desk like a loaded gun. Outside, thunder rolled over Kansas City, the rain beating against her apartment window like fists. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to send everything to the authorities and walk away. But she couldn't. Not after what she'd seen. In the video, Warden Blanchard had smiled as he shook hands with Darrell Clements, sealing a deal that would poison hundreds. It wasn't some backroom mistake or bureaucratic error. It was deliberate. And if what Clements said in that clip was true, Leavenworth wasn't the only kitchen feeding death for profit. The burned man. 2 days later, Evelyn received an encrypted email with no subject line. Inside was one sentence: "Clements wants to talk. But only off the record." They met in an abandoned rest stop outside Topeka. The man who walked out of the shadows barely resembled the photo from the old ID tag. Darrell Clements was thinner now, his face scarred from burns that crawled up his neck and into his hairline. His left eye was glass. He looked at her recorder and said, "Turn that off, or this ends now." When she did, he sat on the hood of her car, staring into the night. "You think I started this?" he asked. "Lady, I tried to stop it." Evelyn said nothing. "Heartland was a front," he continued. "The meat came from a rendering plant in Oklahoma. They processed animal waste, stuff meant for dog food. Vaughn's people just relabeled it. Every batch that didn't pass FDA inspection? Straight to Leavenworth." She frowned. "And Blanchard?" Clements gave a dry laugh. "He didn't care. He was getting his cut. But it went higher than him. The Bureau knew. They called it adaptive waste reduction. You know what that means? Feeding human trash to the human trash." His voice cracked on the last words. Evelyn asked, "Why talk now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I'm dying. The stuff we handled in that kitchen, it's killing us from the inside. You want to know the truth? I'm already dead." He handed her a small envelope, sealed with tape. "Proof," he said. "Invoices, internal memos, even photos from the plant. If you publish it, you'll need to run." Before she could ask another question, he walked away into the rain. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. 3 days later, his body was found near a truck stop off I-70. Official cause of death: suicide. Unconfirmed reports said his throat had been cut. The plant. The documents led Evelyn to Red Rock Rendering, a small industrial facility near Lawton, Oklahoma. The paperwork listed hundreds of shipments of processed protein product delivered directly to Leavenworth under a false corporate name, Midwest Nutritional Solutions. She drove there alone, parking just off the access road. The plant was still operating, the air thick with the stench of blood and decay. Trucks came and went, their tanks marked organic feed. She slipped through a side gate, camera hidden under her jacket. Inside, conveyor belts carried a river of sludge, meat scraps, bone fragments, even fur into massive steel grinders. Workers in stained aprons shoveled the mixture into barrels. Each barrel was sealed, labeled, and stacked onto pallets bound for shipping. But it wasn't the process that made her stomach twist. It was the destination labels. Every crate was stamped, property of Federal Bureau of Prisons, Leavenworth Division. She took as many photos as she could before a voice shouted, "Hey!" Two men in yellow vests started toward her. Evelyn ran, slipping through a maintenance corridor and out through a side door. She reached her car, heart hammering, and drove off without headlights. In the rearview mirror, she saw the guards standing at the gate, one holding a phone to his ear. By the time she reached Kansas City, her inbox was full of messages from unknown addresses. "You're trespassing on federal property. Leave it alone, Ms. Shaw. You've been warned." The Bureau strikes back. Within a week, the Kansas Sentinel, Evelyn's paper, received a federal subpoena. The Justice Department demanded access to her sources and unpublished materials. Her editor called her in, face pale. "They're threatening to shut us down," he said. "You've made too many enemies." She handed him the flash drive. "Then we make one more." But before they could publish, the paper's servers were hacked. All her files, photos, interviews, documents, wiped clean. Even the backup drives were corrupted. The next morning, she found a small package taped to her door. Inside was a burned USB drive and a note. "This is your last warning. Stop digging." Evelyn didn't stop. The Inmate's story. Desperate for new leads, she reached out to a recently released inmate named David Ricks, who had worked in Leavenworth's warehouse. His voice trembled when he spoke. "They made us unload the shipments," he said. "We knew it wasn't right. The boxes leaked. The meat smelled like death. Sometimes maggots would crawl out of the seams. We told the guards. They told us to shut up and keep working." Ricks went on to describe something worse. "One time, a truck came in late, marked biohazard. We weren't supposed to open it. But one of the guys did. There were body bags inside. Human remains. They said it was medical waste from another facility. 2 days later, that same truck went out again, filled with barrels marked protein blend." Evelyn stopped writing. "You're saying," he cut her off. "I don't know what I'm saying. But whatever they were feeding us wasn't just animal." She stared at him, horrified. "Do you have proof?" He nodded. "I buried a tag from one of those bags in the yard before I got out. If it's still there, you'll find it under the west fence, near the utility shed. The graveyard." That night, she snuck onto Leavenworth's perimeter through a drainage culvert. Rain turned the dirt to mud as she crawled toward the fence line. Her flashlight beam caught something glinting, metal buried in the earth. She dug it out with her hands. A faded stainless steel tag, the letters barely legible. "Property of Federal Medical Center, Springfield, Missouri." Her breath caught. Springfield was where the Bureau sent inmates who died under medical observation. If those bodies had been rerouted to Red Rock, then the food at Leavenworth had been contaminated with human remains. She backed away, stomach twisting. A siren wailed in the distance. She ran for her car, tires kicking mud, headlights off until she hit the highway. The broadcast. The next day, Evelyn leaked everything. The photos, the videos, the tag, to an international consortium of journalists. They cross-verified her findings with federal shipping data and internal whistleblower statements. By the following week, the headlines exploded. Leavenworth poison scandal. Expired meat fed to inmates in national fraud scheme. Bureau contractor linked to human contamination in prison food. Death in every bite. Inside the prison kitchen that ran on blood money. Congress demanded answers. The Bureau denied everything. But the public outrage was unstoppable. And then, on live television, something happened no one expected. Warden Blanchard stepped up to a microphone, flanked by lawyers, and said the words that shook the system. We were told to cut costs by any means necessary. The orders came from Washington. He handed a folder to the reporter in front. Inside were federal budget memos signed by procurement directors authorizing alternative protein sourcing to reduce expenses. One signature stood out at the top of the page. Deputy Director Michael Vaughn. The collapse. Federal raids swept through Red Rock Rendering, Baco Logistics, and Vaughn Industries. Dozens of executives were arrested. Vaughn himself vanished before authorities arrived. But inside the chaos, a darker revelation emerged. The Bureau's internal audit, leaked days later, showed that nearly 60% of all federal prisons had received shipments from the same supply chain. Thousands of inmates had been exposed to toxic contaminant. And the profits? Over $200 million funneled through shell accounts linked to retired Bureau officials and private investors. When reporters confronted the Justice Department, their spokesperson said only, "The investigation is ongoing." Evelyn became a household name overnight. Her story had exposed one of the biggest corruption scandals in U.S. prison history. But fame came with shadows. Her phone was tapped. Her emails mirrored. Strange cars followed her home. One night, she returned to her apartment to find her door unlocked. Inside, everything looked untouched, except her laptop. The screen glowed faintly, displaying a new message that hadn't been there before. You think you won? You exposed one kitchen. We own hundreds. Below it was a list of prison names: Florence, Marion, Coleman, Yazoo. And at the bottom, Apex Nutritional Services, approved 2025. She realized the truth. The system hadn't been dismantled. It had rebranded. The haunting end. Months later, Evelyn sat on a panel at a human rights conference in Geneva. Cameras flashed as she told the audience, the scandal at Leavenworth wasn't just about food. It was about the value of human life. When a society sees its prisoners as less than human, corruption becomes easy, because no one's watching what they eat. She paused, glancing down at her notes. I've seen what's behind those kitchen doors. And I can tell you, justice doesn't rot. People do. The audience applauded, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her from the back of the room. A man in a gray suit stood in the shadows. When their eyes met, he smiled faintly and slipped out the exit. She froze. The scar on his jawline looked familiar. When she stepped outside moments later, he was gone, but on the pavement where he'd stood lay a business card, damp from the rain. Apex Nutritional Services. Feeding the future. Her hands trembled as she read the tagline. The corruption hadn't ended. It had evolved. And somewhere, in another prison kitchen, another batch of alternative protein was being prepared for dinner. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the next truth they try to hide might already be on your plate.